ये इसको ऐसे रहने देते हैं, उसकी तरफ कर लेंगे फिर इधर
नहीं, इसको ना ऐसे कर लेते हैं फिर जूम कर लेंगे।
शुक्र है अब दिख रहा है कुछ
बैटरी से मोड ऑन है क्या?
उससे मेरा तो बहुत जल्दी जाता है यार, बैटरी सेवर ऑन करके।
सही है। तो कौन सा मॉडल है?
नॉट है मेरा वन प्लस।
मेरा OnePlus 6G, मेरा सही है भाई।
हाँ शुक्र है।
I request everyone to please sit tight. With that, we begin the second session of the day, a panel discussion on the cities we need towards India at 2047. The chair for this session is Shri Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, Senior Fellow MD. The panelists for this session are Professor PSN Rao, couldn't be with us today. Further, we have Professor KT Ravindran, urban designer, former chairman, Delhi Urban Art Commission. And we have Professor Debolina Kundu, professor, National Institute of Urban Affairs, NIUA, New Delhi. Ajit sir, please facilitate us. Tikender sir, could you please take it from there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think the last session was previous speakers was more of an generic international contextualization, and now how we understand the shaping of Indian cities in 2047. I mean, that's what we call 100 years of India's independence, is something very intriguing, because many complexities are there and many processes are there. How will they unfold? And quite intricately linked to the process of urbanization, of policy, politics, the overall economy. So to generalize that, I do not think, because the two experts that I have with me are like twins themselves. I mean, Professor Kundu is like, we call him kind of Bhisham Pitama on yeah, and then Professor Debolina, who's probably one of the finest as far as our demographics to be understood is concerned. Since ma'am has to go early, so I would suggest that ma'am takes the floor first. But I think there's just two aspects that I want to state right at the inception. The first one is, which to me are like, which would be like the driving forces for the coming few decades. The first one happens to be what we are already entering. Probably there's not much mention about that, is the economic recession that's bound to hit us. I mean, how will it impact the cities? That's a major. I don't have to go into all those details. The Indian cities, how that will be impacted, and layered on top of that is the climate change and its impact, how it impacts our cities, and then I think the third, kind of engulfing feature is the huge loss of biodiversity that we find in our Indian cities, which is also quite inherently linked to all this process. Having said that, it also, there are many other processes also taking place, and according to the figures that we have, by 2031, 40%, that means 600 million people will be living in the city. So, the kind of infrastructure that we require, the kind of the whole mode of participatory governance that we require is. But there's something very interesting aspect about this 600 million. So 53 cities, that's million plus cities, currently hold around 12% of India's population. And it is expected that by 2031, it will jump to around 14%. So we just understand where these processes are taking place. So 14% of India's population would be in this million plus cities. And then 460 class 1 cities that we call, it will be holding currently around say 10%, so there'll be a jump of 11%. So 11% of India's population would be in this large number of 460 cities. But very interesting that 7,423 class 2, 2 class 4 cities currently hold around 15% of India's population, and which may be, I mean, it is estimated holding around what, 12% or 13% of still the India's population. So, I mean, some major things are happening in these towns. And another very revealing, interesting feature, what that's where I want to end what Sandeepji was saying, the urban factor, the rural, or whatever, is that there are 23,000 large villages. Already that process of urbanization has started taking place. They will be holding 15% of India's population. Some of them would be termed urban, some of them may not be statutory. So, it's very interesting, and how will it unfold? I think none other than Professor Debolina, who understands the nuances, who understands the demographic changes that takes place. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Arjun, for this kind invitation. I'm sorry, I need to attend another session with our German counterparts, so I need to leave a bit early. Coming straight away to our topic, cities we need towards India at 2047. So I think all of us, we are aware that cities in this neoliberal regime are treated as engines of economic growth. We rarely look at cities as places where people come together for some other purpose, but basically we treat cities as places where we generate economic activity. That is one thing. And as a result of this thinking, I think the commitment of India for a $5 trillion economy by 2024 is also, I think, emanates somewhere from there. That the role of India's economic success really lies in how well our cities perform, and we really need to change or play with our governance pattern in a manner where cities could generate resources for the entire country, both. And we also dwell at a time where we look at rural and urban separately. We have two different ministries, although I think we need to synergize. Because if we treat rural and urban as separate entities, then as policymakers or as practitioners in the country, we are heading towards a disaster, because this dichotomy must end. And we saw this while during COVID, when there was a lot of reverse migration. Had there been more of integration, I think this millions of people going back to their villages wouldn't have happened. And in 2047, I'll just go to the statistics. Population of the country, it was 1.2 billion in 2011. We are expected to reach 1.64 as per the projections of World Urbanization Prospects 2018. And this year we are expected to be the most populous country in the world, surpassing China. And we also need to take into account that we have the largest share of children's population, child population, if we compare across countries. And we are also at a stage, at a very demographically favorable stage, where the demographic dividend, people in the age group of 20 to 24, that share is increasing, and it will touch the highest in 2025, and it will continue until 2040, that decade, until the 40s. And I think India is very fortunate to have this demographic dividend, and it can reap the benefits of demographic dividend only if we have the proper infrastructure. I don't mean roads and railways, but total infrastructure. It includes education, because if we do not have an educated population, then just people do not matter at all. So health and education, I think these are the two most important areas where we need to invest if we want India to really produce the $5 trillion dollar economy by 2024. Also, cities need to generate employment. We find that we have only 31% population living in urban spaces in 2011, and just now it's around 34%. We are likely to touch 50% by 2046. So when it's 2047, 100 years from the year of independence, I think it will be around 51% going by the current trends. So another thing I think we need to be keep in mind is that although we will touch 50% by 2046, but our current trend of urbanization, if we look at the pace of urbanization, we are at a declining trend. It's only because of the 2,530 new census towns which have been added in the last decade that we have had a positive urban growth. Otherwise, it would have been negative. And if you look at the way the cities are growing within the municipal boundaries, I think most of the cities are depopulating. It is only the peripheral space, the urban space, about which we heard in the last panel. I think that is the space where population and build-up both are increasing. And we did a study with the German counterparts, BBSR, 3 years back, when Mr. Jagansha was heading our institute. What we found out of the 640 districts of 2011, around 88% of the districts, the rate of increase in built-up that exceeded the rate of increase in population, which means urban sprawling in India is happening at a very rapid pace, which really means that we need to plan the spaces just adjoining our cities. Otherwise, the point the chair made about losing biodiversity, I think that becomes very important. And also climate change issues, I think, which really need to be dealt with just now. We cannot wait for tomorrow. And when we look at demography, I think in addition to the youth bulge, we are also entering into a stage where the elderly population would also, a sizable population of part of our population would be elderly by 2047. And our cities need to plan not only for the children, provide employment for the youth, but also sufficient infrastructure for the elderly. I think that we need to keep in mind, which we did not think about maybe a decade before. And we are entering a digital technology space, and with smart cities, although they are only 100, but the other cities under Amrut are also trying to really govern their cities through digital technology. And artificial intelligence, if not today, will come up by 2047. So if we want to create employment for our population and people who are coming from rural areas to urban areas, we need to keep in mind whether our rural folk do have the expertise to get absorbed in the urban space. Would our urban labor market absorb people who are unskilled, uneducated? If not, then we need to train people living in rural areas in the suburban spaces with adequate education, so that when they come to cities or when in situ urbanization happens, they become the rural settlements become urban as they are. So at that time there is no dearth of employment. And before closing, I'll just come up to the last section on metropolitan cities. Our chair did mention about 52 metropolitan cities in 2011, and these cities are expanding. Although I did mention that the population within the core of the city within municipal limits is not increasing, but the periphery is. And the census notifies urban agglomerations in every consecutive census. So, although the core city is not increasing, when we add the census towns which are very close to the boundaries of the main city, we find an increase in the number of urban agglomerations. And if we add up by simple projections, we use the rate of 2001-11 and using the same growth rate, we will have 105. The figures may vary, it may be more, but roughly 100 metropolitan cities by 2041. And the point which I would like to make here, when we have so many, more than 100 metropolitan cities, do we have the governance structure in place to deal with the metropolitan space? Because under NIUA, we, as well as the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, metropolitan planning committees were to be set up, and we failed miserably on that. So if there is no governance structure, because within the city limits you have the municipal corporation, but just beyond you find mushrooming of small industrial setups because master plan norms do not work there. People, they work in the city but live in the peripheries, and also there are a lot of informal activities. So who really takes charge of that space? I think that's a very important concern. We need to really deal with that. And the last point I would like to make is about the small and medium towns. I think they are no one takes care of. When we talk about city urbanization, the first thing which comes to our mind is either Bombay or Delhi or Pune or big cities. So the small towns which constitute around 30% of India's population, because 70 plus is class 1 cities, 100,000 and above. So what happens to those? And when we look at master plans, we find most of the small towns do not have master plans. When we look at census towns are spaces denoted by the census as urban, but actually they are under the Ministry of Rural Development. When we are talking about India reaching this $5 trillion economy, when we look at financing of cities, we see class 1 cities can still generate resources for them, whereas the small towns, the property tax, user charges are minimal. If you look at developed countries, its share of property tax is 4 to 5%, whereas for India it's less than 1% of GDP at current times. So 25 years down the line, are the cities geared to really improve on their finances? Because without finance, nothing will happen. And who really pays for the services? And the most hard hit would be the poor when we look at the current pattern of development. And until and unless we provide space for the poor, like what Kerala has done to some extent, what I was talking to the Principal Secretary of Odisha, and they have launched the Jaga mission, if you are aware about it. So because land belongs to the government, where the poor people have squatted in the state of Odisha, the government could part with that land. And they could also buy land from there was some royal land. So the government also bought land and tried to house the poor where they were. They also had the Mukta scheme of employment generation, 100 days of employment guarantee scheme. So until and unless the state governments with whom the urban development portfolio resides really takes proactive measures of thinking about the poor, our cities will not prosper even if we reach a time beyond 2047. So in order to take advantage of this Amrit Kal, I think the first concern would be housing the poor with adequate basic amenities, strengthening our physical infrastructure, but we also need to think about education, health, and access to services. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Debolina. What, sir, if you don't mind. Yes, so, and if everyone agrees, because Ma'am Debolina has to leave, so we can have a quick round of questions addressed to Ma'am Debolina, and then probably she can answer. And so, yeah, and thanks for such a interesting presentation. I think it's a very complex matter, because what's going to happen, artificial intelligence, the real world, how is it going to really gel together? I mean, there's really complexities. The whole question of urban governance, for that matter. So please, can we just, yeah, Paras. Paras, you can speak without a mic also, maybe.
Professor Kundu, you spoke about the decisions the government is going to take for the next upcoming decades. I would like to ask something specifically on Delhi. The master plan of Delhi, which is being prepared, and it is supposed to take care of the city for the next 20 years. I have read it because I live in Delhi. And in the master plan, one decision was taken that whatever villages are in Delhi, the plan will come 2 years after notification of the plan. Do you think this model will go to the rest of the country? Because what has happened in Delhi villages is known by everybody else. The inequalities which are coming forward are of such a nature that violence is seen everywhere. So I'm asking this because you have mentioned the number of towns which are increasing, you have mentioned the number of cities, small cities, and you mentioned large villages which have a population of thousands of people. If mistakes of the past are repeated again, which we are seeing now in Delhi, what will happen in the country itself? And see, villagers do not understand urbanization. For them, it's all about what is offered to them by others. I'm talking about land. Land gets monetized. What happens after that? Nobody knows. No farmer knows that. If you could speak something on that.
Maybe.
In the end, you talked about housing the poor, but we have seen housing the poor is, do we have better understanding housing where? Because that's very important, and linking to access of services.
You know, Professor Geeta. That was the internal matter.
Yeah. So, very quick question. Professor Debolina quoted a lot of numbers, and as a researcher, what concerns me often, a lot of urban statistics mostly comes in numbers, right? But when we actually reach out to poor, numbers don't really work. It might be good for policy making and for putting forward the argument. How do you look at other forms of data? Can pictures, figures? What are the other forms of data which would be used for policy making? Because even if we do, a lot of participatory methods are never counted as very good evidence for doing policy making, right? How do we really change that narrative, and what do academia has to offer apart from numbers as data, and how do you really recognize other forms of data than just numerical data?
Had a mention of the UADF, in the lines of the RIDF. Since you mentioned about financing, can you comment on things like sanitation, especially for sanitation workers? They've allocated a certain amount, 10,000 crores or something like that, or like you said, something like 7,000 cities, and that too it has to be accessed through the National Housing Bank. And so doesn't it look like as if we have a huge target, as if people are aware of what the target is, but actually the entire look at the planning and the financing is very, very minuscule. So what is your comment on that?
The first, to your comment, whether our cities, the other cities would follow the footsteps of what the master plan of Delhi 2041 has done.
Mic is not working.
You just close it to the.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
So about the master plan, I'm not very sure because I was not part of the process and I shouldn't comment on something done by other teams at NIUA. But I feel that because urban spaces, be it Delhi, be it Mumbai, be it any other city, when rural to urban conversion happens, the larger context should be taken into mind. taken into account. It's not only the city, but because cities are expanding and rural areas are coming in, and in the next 20 years, some more villages will come in the urban domain. So, lot of consultation needs to happen, and any land monetization should not benefit only the urban dwellers who have lot of information, intellect as compared to the rural dwellers who do not have access to that information. So that consultative process is very important, and we cannot say that the rural population need not take the benefits of the urban spaces. That needs to happen, but in a more informed manner. And ma'am, to your question on housing the poor, the example, I worked very closely with the Principal Secretary, Odisha, and what they have done is really, I think other states need to emulate, because the land where the poor were squatting, that was basically the land owned by the government. So that they were not removed from where they were living. And again, in terms of employment, another mission was launched during COVID times, which they call Mukta. So for the development of that slum, into making it more livable, the work which needed to be done, infrastructure development, that was done by the people themselves living there. So on the one hand, the habitat improved, and it was done by the people living in that habitation. So it really helped the people, and not only in improving their quality of life, but also in generating employment. But that may be a challenge for the other states, because that the land where the slums are currently may not be the land owned by the government. So if it's a private land, the government can at the best, like what had happened in Ahmedabad, the slum networking program. Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation declared that few slums won't be evicted for the next 20 years or 10 years, because of which the slum dwellers could invest, the industry where the people were working, the slum dwellers, that's industry, urban mills could invest, and also the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation invested in improving the urban infrastructure within that slum. So those things are really good practices. If all state governments do adopt, I think lives of the poor can improve to a certain extent. And your question on data, other than data, does policy really take into consideration? I'm sorry, even you forget about other means of communication. I think even we do not have a census of 2021 till now. When we talk about evidence-based planning, evidence-based program formulation, I think data is number one. Without data you cannot, everything is anecdotal. So first let us have data, then we talk about some other evidence which could be qualitative, which could really help more of better policy making. And ma'am, for your question on UIDF, I think this 1,000 crores, if you look at the amount and the scale of challenges we have with regard to any urban problem, be it sanitation, be it housing, be it road networks, I think the amount is too small. We really need to scale up. And even what are the conditionalities to reach this 1,000 crores, we do not know. So until and unless there is clarity on that, and what I was part of the committee for this one of the Government of India committees, where for the small ULBs the government was recommending that small they come together, they pool their resources and then they reach out to the market. So what would be the impact of that, we do not know. So just going to the capital market does not help everything. So why not we improve our property taxation, improve our user charges, and use the local funds to fund infrastructure, instead of, I'm not against going to the capital market, but then what is the fallout of that? Whether the ULBs, their vulnerability will increase or not. I think that impact assessment study needs to be undertaken before one goes to the capital market. I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Debolina, and I think we can switch over to Professor KT Ravindran. If she,
I'm sorry, she would like
thank you so much. Are there any formalities to be done? I think. Simi, yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am. And
Thank you. Sorry.
yeah, please. Understand. So, wherever, sir. Wherever. I don't have to say a word more than that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for staying back to listen to the last speaker. It's been repeating as the day went by, but at least thank you all for staying back to listen to this. Thank you, Tikender, for giving me the opportunity to speak here now. And also along with Tikender, IMPRI as well as ActionAid, who have invited me to speak here. So, we have heard a lot of things about urbanization till now, and our session is actually supposed to talk about what we would like to see in the future of cities. So, not at the risk of being a contrarian, I'd like to start by saying that I would like to state 5 things that I don't want to see in the future. Your permission to check.
Yeah.
First thing that I don't want to see is our cities crumbling in the mountains. That's certainly one thing which I don't want to see. I'll first state the 5 things that I don't want to see, and then I'll come to further explanations, or we can develop that through question answers. So the first thing is that I don't want to see our cities crumbling, or the land on which our cities are sitting crumbling under whatever. Okay? The weight or the lack of weight of development. Second thing that I don't want to see is I don't want to see our coastal cities being flooded by, not just by coastal erosion, but also by something which we can do nothing about, we are completely helpless about, that is rising level of the sea. Many cities along the coast have already begun, not the entire cities, but many parts of the cities have already begun to crumble and begun to go under. The second thing I would not like to see. Third thing that I would not like to see is that our cities are becoming, I think that's a bit of an eyewash, because it's about throwing, the average statistics at you to make you believe that there is a certain kind of problem of a certain degree, so that the investments and the money flows regarding that can be contained. So the whole idea that the world is increasing in its heat by 2% is actually a fabrication. Reality is that if they say the average is going to be 2%, the real time heat gain in our cities will be something like at the level of 4 or 6, not 2%. This is something which I don't want to see happen. These 3 things actually literally address centrally the issues of climate crisis. I don't call it climate change anymore. It's a climate crisis, and the climate is here and now. It's not some future 2050 and so on, 2047 as projected in our discussion. It's not going to wait for all that. The climate crisis is right here. Okay? And those who are experiencing the climate crisis are the more vulnerable people. We have already discussed this in the earlier discussions as well. The fourth thing I do not like to see is also what has been brought out. In fact, a lot of range of things have been brought out in the last 4 discussions, is to see people being disempowered about deciding what is their future. Increasingly, the decisions are moving to larger and larger issues. And when you say larger and larger issues, they are also becoming increasingly unknown issues. And the IT sector would have us believe that our only possible future going forward is in IT and AI and so on and so forth. Yeah? So our decisions about how we perceive our own future is being removed from the people and taken to larger and larger globally defined systems over which we have no control. I think this is a very alarming situation that we need to worry about, because it is actually corroding the foundations of our democracy. And the last thing that I'd like to see is, I would like not to see, is our cities not being able to imagine their own future, not being disempowered, but even to that extent unable to imagine our own future, as a crisis of the current condition, because the future is at best a projection of our anxieties about the present. It is very important for us to realize that the actual crisis is here. That is what we are inverting as projection into the future, because the current crisis is more critical to define how we perceive the future. Okay. In this, the most critical thing is that we are losing control over our own environment. We are losing control over our own decision-making processes, and we are moving larger and larger decision-making systems. So we talk about large numbers, and we talk about larger systems, about regional planning. Certainly, of course, there are issues, but what we are losing control over is our own neighborhood. What's happening to our own people around us? So what all these lead to is actually a change in the discourse about planning and development, where we need to talk about when you apply a reductionist logic, one is about not the impending climate crisis, the climate crisis which is already here, and the second is the disempowerment of citizens and therefore the erosion of democracy. I think these are two very, very critical current issues which are actually staring us at the face, not just in the question of cities, or it's not about just urban areas and rural areas. It's about our life system and how it is integrated with the nature that we live around. And that erosion is, I think, is a very dangerous trend, and we are allowing it to master us or determine how we think about our own future, because they deploy data. They tell you that the only future that we have, or the humanity has, is to move towards more and more IT. Okay? The IT companies at the CEO level, not at some employee level, but the owners of the IT companies meet every year to actually take stock of how the market is moving. And they determine what directions the whole world has to move. And the central instrument they use for that is data. So if we want to beat the data game in its own terms, the only way to beat that is by learning more and more about it. That's actually the catch-22 situation in which the IT world is thriving or is going to thrive. So I'm not saying that IT is not going to determine what we are going to do, but we need to know that. You just take the example of a simple wristwatch. Earlier in my young days, there used to be wristwatches which you can wind with your hand, and if you don't wind it, it doesn't work. Okay? We know that one wheel will move another wheel, and will move another wheel, and then will move the arms of the clock, and you can read the time. But look at what's happened today. I press a button on my watch, and I see shining numbers and lines and kind of graphics and data and all that displayed. And I don't at all know how these damn things work. slowly that knowledge about the mechanics of time or how we are measuring time, simple thing like measuring time, has moved away from us to an unknown area. And that unknown area is unfortunately not working in my interest, it's working in the interest of its own industry. So we have actually a situation where our developmental thinking has been enlarged in its size and scale, and now we are only thinking about those larger systems, and because that larger system is connected with larger investments. So it's another form of what Abhidindu also brought out, is another form of colonization. And it's the colonization of our future, not just present. They are telling you that this is your future. If you don't believe it, you are an idiot. Yeah? If you believe it, you are a customer. Okay? So, where are all these things going as far as city design is concerned? That I think is an area that we need to worry about. And about disempowerment, I take usually, I'm from Kerala and I've been closely associated with discussions on Kerala. I just returned from a meeting called a design policy for the Kerala state. Yeah? So Kerala state has now begun to recognize that its future is not in industries. Yeah? Because people don't allow industries to pollute. There's a problem in the neighborhood. They'll shut down the Coca-Cola factory because the waters in the wells are contaminated, and so on and so forth. They don't allow large industries to actually survive at a predatory level in the environment. There are many large industries in Kerala, even now, you know, but they are all running at a level which is not predatory of the immediate environment. The moment it becomes predatory, there's protest, people go on strike, they garrow the gates of the industry and they shut it down. You know? Because people are now aware of the implications of the industry on the environment. So they know very well that even though initially it's so ruled by CPM and a very progressive thinking CPM in Kerala in particular, and they had originally began with the idea of industrialization as the sole recourse to creating larger and larger number of workers and therefore a more socialist future. Now they've begun to redefine that. So the proposal for this design policy actually was to how to move away from industry. If you look at how there is a national design policy, there is already a document from 2007 onwards. And it's under that the growth of all these NIDs and all took place as forming creative collaborations with the industry to produce better and better engines of growth. Yeah? And these engines of growth, as defined in the first urbanization report, was that every city is an engine of growth. Yeah? But what has it become now? Every city has now become an engine of inequity. They are no more just engines of growth, they are engines of inequity. We know that inequity is growing in a huge leaps and bounds in this country. The poor is getting poorer and poorer, and the rich is getting richer and richer. Yeah? We all know that. And that's quite evident in Kerala. And we have Kerala speaks of highest education levels, it has highest health indications, it has least amount of child mortality, it has no, the number of children going to school has come down, so that many schools have to now close down because there are no kids to go to school. Small schools are closing down because there are no kids. There are 15 teachers who paid government salaries and there are 4 kids. It's just an unsustainable model. Yeah? So all these kind of changes are happening there. And now they recognize that the answer does not lie in big industry and having a design policy that abets and aids the industrial design aspect of development, but they'll have to look at developing the creative art forms of the city, of the state. The Kerala tourism, for instance, Kerala has no Taj Mahal, it has no Ajanta Ellora, it doesn't have a Brihadishwara temple, it has no monuments of that scale. Yeah? It's a place which is actually marketing an immersive lived experience of being in nature and being with communities. That is the selling point of the Kerala tourism department. Yeah? So these two main sectors of that is design and tourism has to grow together. It has to improve the market of what it is selling, not try to create more NIDs in Kerala. But it has to work with local communities, local production groups, local musicians, local storytellers, and all these are very well intertwined in Kerala with nature and protect that nature. So there's no place for big roads. Unfortunately, we still entertain the idea that bigger the road, the more progressive we are. And if Joshimath has crumbled, it's because of big roads. Yeah? And we are still thinking of big roads as progress. Back in 1882, when they brought in the land acquisition policy in Bombay, it was for improving the roads. Yeah? Over 100 years have passed, and we are still looking at progress as bigger roads and faster speeds. So there is a need for a complete change in the way we imagine our futures. And the better they are anchored in the crisis of the present, more you can deliver a quality of life to our people. Because if the level at which resilience is being ignored in every master plan after master plan in the country are ignoring resilience as a method of looking at urban growth. And we know that if there is a flood in a city, the hardest hit victim is the poorest person on the road. Because it's not only that he loses his household, which goes underwater, he also loses his livelihood, which is on the road. Yeah? So, and their ability to bargain in the economic market is so low that they're not even able to support the kind of health issues which follow a flood. So everything is like showing us pointers as to how this is actually hitting the poor. The form of development we are doing now is actually hitting the poorest of the poor. Yeah? It's not about just poor and rich. It's about the lack of humanity in the way we imagine our futures. You know? And so I don't know whether I was sounding too pessimistic in this presentation, but I'm not a pessimist. I'm in the business of design and I have to be an optimist, otherwise I have no business in my field. Yeah? But I'd like to point out this, that what we need is now a complete shift from our imagination about our future, which is anchored in our present, not in some imaginary IT dystopia that we are all planning that, AI will tell you when to go to the loo and, that's not what we're going to do. No, that's not going to determine our quality of life.
Sorry, true.
It's going to be determined by what we are doing within our control to our own immediate environment. So we need to scale this whole damn thing down from, this kind of large, kind of terrorizing presence of data to the local action. We need to ensure that our development models are focused on neighborhoods. How in the immediate neighborhood, where we can even ensure that certain degree of food security is assured, water security is assured. No, small, even though they sound like small things which affect everyday life, they are the most important things for human well-being. And if we cannot deliver human well-being, what the hell is this planning all for? If that is only going to enhance the potential of the industry to find larger and larger markets, then I think we are like completely mistaken about where we are going. And unfortunately, every one of these 5 things I suggested to you that I would not like to see is actually the directions in which the country is trying to move. So I think it's very critical. I plead with you to be critically examining the present before we determine what is our future. And our future is not going to, should not be allowed to be dictated by large companies which have huge marketing mechanisms and globally defined think tanks, and they control all the money market, they control foreign exchange, etc., etc. Okay? This G20, for instance, is one such body. See, we are making such a noise about G20. What the hell does it mean to us, to our people who are deprived of fundamental needs in life? What does this G20 mean to them? It means nothing to them. Yeah? And as was already suggested, it's coming through a rotation process. It's no great achievement to sit on that chair. It's a rotation, you're automatically going to be sitting there or not. The only way we can look at it from a positive perspective is that ये हमारा पैंट उतार दिया है. G20 will take off our clothes because it will be very. How long can you build walls to hide slums? How many more grand stadiums will you build to hold these meetings? They cannot do that. Keep on doing that. No, we'll have to look at how the population that we are working for is accessing at least a minimum quality of life provided through a planning process. And if G20 will bring so many people to this country, they're going to see what's happening here. We cannot keep hiding this. We cannot keep doing some data magic to say that we've done this and we have that much thing. We have so many trillion economy. It means nothing to our lives. These are public posturing, which we have seen is vacuous in its content, because we are in every stage going and proclaiming they've signed every document there is. Whether it's the Paris Accord, whether it's starting from Rio, they have signed every accord. Yeah? And we have said that we'll do this, we'll bring to zero level our carbon emissions, etc., etc. And we keep on public posturing globally and acting exactly in the opposite direction locally. Yeah? What is I don't even think this is duplicity. It's something more than duplicity. How long can we continue to do this? We'll have to cross-question our present. I think we have to look at our realities, political realities, along with development realities in the face. We have to stare it in the face and not blink. Take a position for the neighborhood, not for data, not for regional plans, not for national plans. Let's look at the neighborhoods. How are people living in those places? Can they walk in their own neighborhood? Do they have play? Do they all have toilets? Do they get water? Do they get electricity for 24 hours? Let's look at those things at the neighborhood level. And let's also reverse our gaze from the big cities to the small neighborhoods in our cities, where development focus can be around food security and water security, and the security of children, like all those, humanizing our approach towards cities. I think if we don't reverse this gaze, I find a bleak future. Yeah? So I don't think the future is bleak because we are all sitting around and the moment the first stage of action is becoming aware of that. Whole purpose of, I think, all of us getting together today is to actually increase our level of awareness about the crisis we are facing. And if that has happened, we are taken the first step towards its remedy. But just thinking about it, just discussing it in forums, holding seminars is not going to be the solution. I think we'll have to impact policy from a much more direct level. And whether we like it or not, the only way you can directly impact policy is political. It's a political way. And I think that's the only direction left for us. Thank you. I'm sorry if I took so long.
I got carried away actually. so I didn't even look at those. Thank you so much. And I think it was very highly required because the notes from where we started, and actually it should have ended here with a note that how impregnated the future is with the present, and also when you said, that what I do not want, but then what should be the way, I think that was very important. And I don't have words to summarize what Professor KT said. I think the floor is open, we can take the questions. How much time do we have, Dr. 10 minutes. Sir, please.
One worry is whether, in terms of the local, whether at the local level where we teach our students, whether in the institute where you taught, things like climate crisis or engaging with artificial intelligence are going to be part of the syllabus or not. And if they are not going to be part of the syllabus, where are your students going to learn it?
Sorry, I was just speaking to Arjun. I was wondering, because when I came to this session, I'm Arvind, I teach at Jamia. So I thought I will not ask me, congratulate IMPRI team that they have brought a mayor who is so educated, who has written a book. So he would be one of the very few mayors. And once, if one look at this flap of the book, it just looks like New York City, and he have been a mayor of such, city. Anyways, I think I'll begin with where Professor Abhyendra Saran raised this question about hospitable city, and I'm kind of one of his students. I teach social exclusion, so I would try to locate that question here. I'll begin with Dr. Ambedkar's saying about village. He said, what is village but a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism. So when he says about, because we talk about urban, rural, and the divide, and urban becoming some rural for rural tourism like Surajkund, or a rural becoming very urban, we all, because of the globalization and infrastructural development, national highways. I would want to bring a entirely different question, and which Arjun and Sukhdev Swaraj's team has already worked on, like कैसे आप मुसलमान हैं तो दिल्ली में घर लेना मुश्किल है, कैसे नॉर्थ ईस्ट के हैं स्टूडेंट्स, it's not very easy to hire a house. So from that perspective, what I'm asking for is, how do we visualize the equitable city? And by equitable, because I also write for Fatima, I very quickly look at the word meaning. So equitable means hissedari. So in that sense, I was just wondering, because right from beginning, Raisina Hill, it is Raisina Pahadi जहाँ पर Raisina बना, या JNU में जब पढ़ते थे तो कुसुमपुर पहाड़ी जहाँ पर slum था. Today I stay at Jamia. It was Okla village where Gandhi ji used to come and stay. So it is near Okra village that Jamia blossomed. So in that sense, or where I was earlier staying, a place called Sheikh Sarai, there's a village called Chirag Delhi. So these villages inside this city, and so it's not a dichotomous, but still in terms of finding those spaces, because when we had Delhi riots, it was primarily those rural areas. When we have these practices of communalism and even practices of khap panchayat giving decisions about such things. So I was just, I know it's very open-ended question, but I just thought to bring to this
So
panel.
we have
Thank you.
just two now.
Well, for Ravindran's question, I taught in SPA for 30 years. I taught the urban design program for all that time. Same subject, small group of students, same subject. And we do teach all these subjects that you just referred about IT and its application and all that. We are also studying trends as predicted by the IT sector. But if you don't know about the subjects that you're trying to understand, you don't know, if you're ignorant about it, that is no way to fight it. The only way you can fight it is from the inside. So the closer you get into the fortress of your enemy, the more deeply you can penetrate the fortress, the more you can fight it from inside. And I think that's the only way it can be fought. Because it is a huge juggernaut. It's not full of evil-minded people. No, they are good people. They are very nice, very idealistic young people who, lot of them work in all these fields, which have such fantastic implications on our cities. The field of data analytics is full of very young people in their 20s, who are masters at analytics. And it's not that they mean ill, but we should look at the larger apparatus which is actually constructed by the capital that is involved in it. And that, I think, is the ethical side that you need to teach while you're teaching the technical side about data. So education without ethics is, it's like manufacturing murderers. It's not about a real education. So I think the ethical part is also debated, used to be debated in our classrooms. Yeah, only Shubhendu is the only student that I can see from the department. I don't know whether he'll agree with this or not. But basically there is a combination of information and ethics which makes up the environment of the classroom. That, I think, is and we cannot define what are those ethics, because that's left to be negotiated by the teacher and the students as a group, as a mutually shared environment. So we do attempt that by doing extra seminars and discussions and so on what is being delivered in the classroom. So that is a brief answer. I don't know if that is a satisfactory answer. I think most importantly it is for us to think about what we are doing, what are we learning, and how are we using that learning should be defined by the ethics of that specific activity, which cannot be generalized. There's no one rule. It has to be defined by each classroom. That's the first thing. Then the second question is about, I didn't actually quite understand the question.
Equitable city.
Yeah, how do you move towards equitable city? I think it's in breaking down the scale. That's why I'm talking about a smaller and smaller scale. Because inequity has become 5 times poorer through COVID. One industrialist has become 5 times richer. And that is not just by accident. It's by design. And our cities had a major role to play. All the larger systems that we talked about, for instance, food distribution and the location of godowns where food should be stored, it's controlled by one man in the country, which is impacting everyone's life every day. So that's a strategy which led to that condition. So to an extent, our cities are becoming instruments of practicing those strategies. That's where we need to fight the system to see how, by knowing the system better, how systemically you can fight the issue. I think that's the only way you can actually create, kind of not make sure that our cities become engines of inequity. They have now become engines of inequity. Today, if somebody asks you to write a new urbanization report, I think this should be one of the chapters. Well, in 1987, I think when that original urbanization policy was written, it was also called the Charles Correa Committee. They talked they're not stupid people, they're intelligent people, they were well-meaning people, they were not meaning to build cities, but they coined this word, engines of growth. Engine itself is subscribing to a mechanical imagination about cities, not about a humanized imagination. On top of it, we talk about growth as the ultimate goal. not the quality of that growth, not the differentiation of that growth into equitable growth and inequitable growth. When that happens, the problem begins there. And we know that that is what has happened. Now, of course, we don't have an urbanization policy. There is a very small document written by Sanjeev Sanyal,
NUP.
a small document, it's authored in his name. It talks about it makes all the right noises about cycling and pedestrianization and cutting down cars and improving the environment in the cities and so on. And day before yesterday, we heard someone very high up in the government repeat those things as a possible urban future. Wonderful they are, but it's like an aging prostitute getting made up more and more and more. When I say prostitute, I don't mean only a woman, a man, a male prostitute as well. So it's like they don't know where to stop it. It's not about beautification. It's about structural change within the economy and within our.
So yeah, by the way,
tend to be very long.
the policy that Professor KT was referring to is a chapter in this book, what Samya wrote.
Right. Yeah, and,
So,
and
Arvind?
the policy, officially does not exist because it's been taken off, and now we also have double engines. So I think since cities will kind of evolve in that sense. Triple engines also maybe in future. So just to think through and put some points also and reflections also for how IMPRI, ActionAid and friends can kind of take this forward as well. So from that perspective, taking from what KT has just mentioned, that here if we are debating on India's G20 presidency, frankly I am absolutely unaware, as some other friends in the room, of why this is actually so important and what really is going to happen here. So I think to understand the enemy more and also realizing that secondly that this is probably one space where we can actually pinch and get some serious messaging across, which otherwise is not possible in the context that we are in. So realizing that potential, because this could be an opportunity, and the way frantically the state is trying to act in all the cover-ups and the sheets and all that, maybe this is the time to show that the pants were never there in the first place. That's point number one. Secondly, developing countries means that G20 has a lot of other global south nations. Seeing things at a similar scale, all the Brazils and the South Africas and so on and so forth, where I was thinking that ActionAid, Sandeep ji with World Urban Campaign there are already other networks that exist. So is this an opportunity then to also for us to learn, share, and in the process of understanding this better, also work with other people, organizations, networks, coalitions, so on and so forth. That would be really useful. Primarily also then coming to the last point is that the colonization is also of the mind. If you ask now of what could be done in 2020, leave 47, I think 2030, there would not be many people, at least in the urban space, who would clearly be able to articulate. So in a sense, we are all part of the product of the market economy that is, that we are all sort of products of that economy. So I think we lack the leap of faith that is required for the imagination or even a counter to Amrit Kal. So we require new set of people's movements who probably have better solutions which are much more decentralized and localized. So I think what can we do as a bunch of folks who are connected and to have a counter to Amrit Kals, because we are not able to think 50 years in advance. So those were some suggestions and points.
We'll come to that side. We'll take all this.
I actually I have a couple of minutes to discuss. I think main issue is methodological, and I will give two examples. So one example of a research done by UPenn students and the professor called Ian McHarg in 1960s, late 60s, I remember it. and around the time perhaps I was born, so late 60s at that time, and I think it's very, very relevant. Because most of the critiques are ideological and not methodological. So what they did is they looked at cities as layers, as you talked about, the ecological layers and also the human layers, and then try to put it together and see what is the most suitable land for development. And that was very much connected to what we are discussing about rural-urban fringes and all that. So I don't see that kind of exercise happening anywhere in the country, frankly speaking. I've seen some of the institutions taught there. None of that exercise will happen. So most of our planning and urban design and the related fields have been very, very normative. So one is that the data is not a problematic thing. Data, how you translate it, for example, through mapping, is a very useful data. Second example I give is
how do you define the usefulness is the problem.
Oh, that is the attitude through which you look at the data and the information. At the moment, we don't have information. For example, H6 pyramid. In many cities, we don't have. The small towns, we don't have any information. So
we are just talking data.
No, I mean,
I don't want to intervene between the teacher and the student.
Second information is how the data, and data means information. Second thing is different kind of things, which is East Kolkata wetland mapping, where the community came together when Prabhujyoti Ghosh started initiative. Community came together, started locating the maps like bus stands, lamp posts, so they can relate to it, which is also empirical, which is also informative and database to some extent. And then they start developing the information and the map, and which everybody tries to own it. So at one point of time, information from the community, as we have been discussed, which is being discussed. Second thing is looking at the city as a layer, because then you take your ideological aspects out of it and look at it much more, introspective manner. So I think these are a couple of examples which I would say that let's not generalize this information that data is bad, this is bad, and that's all.
Let prosecute. Then we can have Paras or Nalinji.
Should I respond or?
So can you remember all the?
No, that's why I'm saying that.
Take also, because then
we can save time. We are already.
Paras.
I would
And then
something and ask a question. So,
Mrs.
I happened to meet the planning authorities of the city regarding the villages within the city. The answer was that the villages were kept intact as a village, and the surrounding land, that is the farmland, was used to create cities. This is the model which has existed for a lot of decades. As you mentioned that you were in SP for 45 years. But planning concept never considered that we could have planned those villages to include them in the city framework. When I mean framework, that means services which were planned for the city could have been given to the village. Right now, half of the villages of Delhi have been urbanized. The gentleman on the left said that Muslims and all that they feel fear and there are kind of problems. So something was said that Muslims are vulnerable. I happen to know villages where Muslims have been living for 3 generations. उनको बचाया तो वो उसी गांव में रहते हैं 3 पीढ़ियों से. ऐसे लोग थे. दिल्ली में 1947 में कह रहे जी कत्लेआम हो गया था, ये हो गया था, वो हो गया था. तो फिर ऐसे वो लोग कौन थे जिन्होंने उन लोगों को बचा कैसे लिया? And this is not part of the history of Delhi. वो बताएंगे नहीं, because the villagers do not have this concept of speaking up. The villagers, innocent villagers, and the researchers who talk about socially relevant research, they have been silent on this. This is the information I had. The question was, see, we are planning cities on the farmlands. What stops the planners from utilizing those village habitat, the residents of the village, to be included in this plan so that inclusivity enters the village? If we lose them, the village is like this. A lot of tensions come and generation after generation is exploited. So if you could explain something.
Okay. And then I think Sadeepji wants to make a point. Oh, they are saying. So Sadeepji just. Yeah.
Because we were almost de-ideologizing development. I mean, it's interesting what you said for a debate, and I didn't really think the word layering that Professor Sharan was using. I mean, construction of layering itself is an ideological process too, even if one debates about it. But my point is not that. My point is about other spectre, which is the unleashing of the demon of political religion, which is sort of invading almost all cities. You touched on it, so I want to escalate that point. And I think that should be definitely in our conversation on the kind of cities we want. I just don't only mean religion. There's a whole range of things that it embodies, which fundamentally at this point in time is about religion. But it has been about identities, has been about the question which Ambedkar has been talking of a lot. I think that Professor KT, wonderful sort of disposition, would probably be also one central element of what we certainly don't want to wish to see. We don't even want to dream to wish to see. But rights is not a new issue. The question of demonization of particular groups, caste, identities, religion is not a new issue, which is not a new demon which has appeared, at least in our cities. And I think this needs to be contested, challenged, and called out. Thank you.
Last, yeah.
I think one of the points that comes up when this guy asked about, Arvind asked about equitable cities, or when Professor Ravindran talked of the need to have disseparate voices instead of just having a monolithic set of voices, is you need a space where you have open groups, that people who are actually connected to the ground, people who actually have a point of view, people who actually feel that sense of sensitivity, they need to be given a voice. And there are actually social scientists and political philosophers that have written about it. Like there's a German political philosopher called Jürgen Habermas who wrote about the public sphere and the idea of open groups. Even Arvind Kejriwal in his book Swaraj wrote about the power of open groups, that there is a Gram Sabha and there is a Gram Samiti. The Samiti is people who are appointed and the Sabha is people who are actually the people who are concerned and care about the issue and who show up to say, and they are given a chance to speak. So I think that there is a very important need in our cities to let emergent voices emerge. That when you bring together all the people from a constituency, irrespective of their caste and creed, and let them be a part of a dialogue, solutions will emerge. And I would say that this is my observation and my thought that I'd just like to put across.
So
Thank you.
I think you respond to all and then also conclude. Finally.
One last question.
Yours also?
Yes.
Come on.
As a design planner, so what do you think of a mega policy or the plans we have in terms of National Infrastructure Pipeline, PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan, and National Industrial Corridor, North, South, or as a design planner?
So, and then conclude finally, because
I think it's so top-down versus bottoms-up. Sir is talking about bottom-up emergent solutions, and you're talking about the top-down. Anyways,
Arjun, please.
I'd answer the last question first. I think everything that's big needs to be viewed with suspicion. I'm not saying we should dismiss them. Everything that's big should be viewed with suspicion, because its implications at ground level in people's lives, in the experiential side of development, has been found to be normally negative. It can also be positive in some ways. We need to negotiate that space. We don't discuss that at all. So when you say national mission for this and that, I'm squirmish about it. Okay? I fear it in some way. That's one thing. Second thing is that to Shutendo, I'd like to say that I was not saying that data is a bad thing. I was saying that if data is going to rule our lives and that's going to be used by the capital construct to impose development models on us, we need to resist that. That's what I was saying. It's about forming an ethical position about the large structures which are unleashed on us. I think the third question was about urban villages. Actually, that's a point which has been discussed quite often in the past about whether to include the urban villages into Delhi's development plan or not. I think at the time of Tejinder Khanna, when he did talk about merging them into development process, but it cuts both ways, because so far they've retained a certain level of neighborhood level autonomy, which has its own virtues of addressing development. Whereas that would be totally destroyed if you make it part of a larger thing called master plan, which does not recognize local realities. So it cuts both ways in that sense. It's a larger debate, and of course, having used the Lal Dora, the idea of the red line around the village, as a means to exclude them from development is certainly not appreciated by anyone. Even the people who made that Lal Dora are now worrying about what it has done to the Lal Dora areas, because they've just become, because they're not subjected to any bylaws, so they have like narrow little plots, 3 meter wide plots going 6 floors and so on. There are lots of issues. Total breakdown of plumbing, electricity and water. All those issues are there, which is what makes it now look like it's a rosy picture if the development process can enter. But there are solution, I think, has to be found locally, because these villages are also earlier settlements of Delhi. They're not just, engines of economic growth, They were also places where whatever we have as a history of the city has grown through the process of these small villages. Many of them are very important from perspective of culture. And they are, even today, they are the backup of something large like the fashion industry. Where does the fashion industry go for doing their Zardoshi work and buttonholing and so on? They go to the urban village, because it provides an economic opportunity of cheaper labor and cheaper space. And the price is being paid by the people who work in those environments. So it's a larger debate, and how the so-called, we normally valorize the informal sector, but the informal sector has been exploiting the urban village for years and years. They have 10 people working in a room on a highly polluting substance, and those are sold without a bill on the roadside. It's part of the cycle of investment and sale of the informal sector. All the Saturday markets are full of things which are produced in urban villages, and they are polluting and destroying those environments. Children are growing up with asthma problems and so on and so forth. So thank you for making this suggestion, because it's a complex problem which has not been properly phased out, not been discussed or talked about in any plan. Even the latest plan does not deal with these issues in a proper way. It only talks about how to bring in planning standards into these villages. And where are the planning standards formed? In European and American suburbs, and we're still using them after 70 years of their being around. So it's a complex problem, and I think it requires larger discussion, so I will not go into it. And the last one, I suppose, was a comment. Yeah, I thought it was a comment from something, not really a question. Is that a question in what you said? I thought it was a comment you made on the.
If you have responses, that will be wonderful, but please.
And if you have a response to mine also, that would also be wonderful.
Oh, he is coming.
I'm coming to the issue. Actually, can you repeat the question so I'll be more pointed about my reply?
I'll repeat, and I'll repeat it in brief.
Yeah, very
respecting
short.
the time.
Yeah.
So what I said was that what are your thoughts on the idea that there is a need to have open group consultation and dialogue to include voices on the ground without attaching a hierarchy or an order of appointment to them, so that emergent solutions which are in consonance with the sensitivities and needs of local people can be explored and evolved.
Very true. I fully agree with what you said, and I thought I did mention this when I said about the erosion of autonomy from communities, about how to make decisions about their own physical environment. That's precisely what is meant. when I said that, what is the answer to your question is what was implicit in my comment on that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I think it's absolutely essential that we move back to that, rather than having large pictures and frightening scenarios and global capital flows and G20s and all like coming on top of. I mean, it's engaging our minds, it's engaging our whatever thinking process we have. They are irrelevant. To me, it is very irrelevant whether we are G20 or we are not G20. I don't know what it means.
Yeah, I don't know what it means.
Okay,
Thank you.
so you want to make a final?
No, that's.
Well, thank you so much. I think because we are. Arjun, you want to make some last vote of thanks? Vote of thanks. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been really a lovely. Thank you for joining this entire and the book launch and the 2 sessions that we've had. And I hope we have recorded.
Nice session, a very informative session, and as well as the IIC team for letting us be here and have our discussion here. Thank you for all the participants for being here as well, for taking out time. And with that, I would like to wish you all a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being